Hello, guys. Welcome to the 2021 LaTeX workshop, co-run by Mathsoc and the Computer Science Engineering Society. Yeah, so let's just get started. So the format for today's workshop is going to be partly the slides. So the slides are going to be used as a reference, but most of the learning we'll be doing today will be just live coding on Overleaf. And Overleaf is just probably the easiest platform to sort of use LaTeX. Yep, and then some things will be omitted during the workshop depending on the time. So we won't cover style files, which you don't really need if you're just working on an assignment. And we may omit some pseudocode, but that depends on whether we have time at the end or not. Cool. And if you guys have any questions throughout the workshop, I will be just keeping an eye on the chat. So feel free to just pop it in the chat and I'll try to answer it as soon as I can. All right. With that being said, let's get underway. So I guess the first thing we kind of want to talk about is, well, why should we use LaTeX over, say, Word or Google Docs, right? Because you could easily just do all of your assignments and all of your documents on Word, as you've been doing in high school and probably primary school. But doing it over LaTeX over Word is a lot cleaner. So a lot of the things that you write on LaTeX is a lot cleaner in terms of mathematical expressions. So yeah, no more click find shenanigans. So instead of going on Word, where you have to click on a particular thing and then you have to find a particular expression, et cetera, on LaTeX, everything is written for you pretty much verbatim. And you don't really need to go around finding commands. You can easily just look it up on, say, a documentation which has everything that you need. So it's much easier than using it on Word. You can also align blocks of equations, figures, tables. You can draw diagrams, and they are a lot easier than doing it on Word. It looks more professional. It looks a lot less clunky than a Word document. And yeah, so there is a Facebook group called It's in LaTeX, so it must be true. And indeed, I do stand by it. If it's on LaTeX, then clearly it must be true. And there are so many more things about LaTeX that are better with LaTeX than Word. Cool. These are just a few dot points. So with that being said, what is LaTeX? The first thing we kind of want to clear is the pronunciation of LaTeX or LaTeX. A lot of people pronounce it like the rubber sort of thing, latex. That is not quite correct, because the person who created tech pronounces it as T-E-C-K. So we kind of think of it as, okay, so the tech part of LaTeX, it has to be pronounced tech. But whether we pronounce the L-A as lay or la is really up to personal preference. So the pronunciation is either LaTeX or LaTeX, depending on your preference. LaTeX or LaTeX is a markup language. So what that really means is that a lot of the code that you use in LaTeX, they contain opening and closing tags. Yes, this is being recorded right now, I think. Yeah. So LaTeX is a markup language, which means it contains opening and closing tags. And you'll see a lot of that when we actually go over some examples. And they would define the structure of your document. It was created by a computer scientist called Donald Knuth. He created the first version called Tech in the early 1980s. And then a couple years later, another person called Leslie Lamport, hence the LA part in LaTeX, wrote up a bunch of macros or a bunch of functions or commands that are now standard in a newer version of Tech called LaTeX. Cool. All right. So before we kind of get started in the nitty-gritty parts of writing LaTeX code, we kind of just want to go over setting up your environment. So the one that we're going to be using throughout the workshop is called Overleaf. And Overleaf is probably the easiest and the fastest tech editor that you want to use, unless you want to use LaTeX for offline purposes. But if you have an internet connection, Overleaf is the fastest way to kind of get you started with writing LaTeX. It is completely online, so it supports cloud backup, requires an internet connection, and the good thing is that all packages are pre-installed in their own server, which means that you don't have to manually install particular packages in order to use commands. So everything is already installed for you, which is very, very convenient for us. Notion is a relatively new tech editor. It's not really a tech editor. It's more of a like a note-taking website, but it does have tech support. So tech support. So yeah, it does support text syntax, and it's similar in nature to Overleaf, but instead of using LaTeX or tech, it uses a lightweight version called KTech. If you want to have some offline purposes, MicTech, Tech Studio, ProTech, and there's a couple other ones as well. They are all very handy and they are all very easy to install. So you might want to check those out for yourselves. And also Visual Studio Code. I kind of put this in a separate dot point because I know that a lot of you guys come from a computer science background and you guys are familiar with Visual Studio Code. It does support text syntax. So if you're already familiar with VS Code, feel free to use Visual Studio Code. For Notepad++, I don't know if it does support LaTeX. You might have to just search that yourself. But if it does, then feel free to use it. As long as you can compile LaTeX code, that's perfectly fine to use. Cool. All right. So I guess now we're going to get into sort of well, I guess before that, we'll kind of set up our own sort of Overleaf. So here you can kind of see that this is just the Overleaf website. So if you just go to overleaf.com, then something like this will pop up and just create an account. And then, yeah, basically once you get there, then you can just hit new project. And here you'll have like a lot of different versions. Just for now, at least for this workshop, we'll just stick with blank project. And a blank project, all it does is it gives you just a very standard document. Yep, so it will give you some beginner code, it will give you an output, and it's very, very handy. So we'll go over what each of these mean in a few slides in, but just for now, as long as you can open an Overleaf file, then that's all you really need to do. Cool. So the structure of a document, it's going to be split into two parts. So the first sort of section is called your preamble. So your preamble will have everything that you won't render on your output. So these include your packages, any macros or commands that you want to define. So if we look at our standard, can you guys see the code here? Or do you want me to make it a little bit bigger? I can make it, whatever, I'll just do that. Hopefully this is big enough. It is okay, cool. All right, so over here, you can kind of see that there's a few things before your begin document. The section here is called your preamble. And then the section here is called the body. So the preamble here is going to be everything that won't be rendered in your output. And everything from begin document to end document is going to be where your content is going to lie. So this is all of the things that will be rendered in your output. And you can always hit recompile and yeah, nothing happens. Cool. If you guys have any questions, feel free to just pop that into the chat. Yeah, so in the body, render text will go here. So for example, if I had nothing in my document, in my preamble, and I just had pi is approximately 3.14, this is the sort of output that you might expect. All right. So we kind of talked about this, just package installations and macros. Those two kind of things are primarily what you put into your preamble. You can also put in other things like inputting other files or inserting other file names into your document. All of that will go into your preamble. And then your body will be the rendered text. Cool. Some packages that you should always add in every single LaTeX file. You should always add AMSmath, which is the American Mathematical Society. So that's the AMS part, math package. And this is sort of the universal package for everything you want to do with LaTeX. Pretty much anything that you need in a standard LaTeX document will be located in this specific package. And you should always add AMS simp. Again, AMS meaning the American Mathematical Society. And these two together will contain pretty much anything that you need in a standard LaTeX file. So in our canvas, let's just write that in. So in order to add a new package, we are going to create a new command called use package. So use package just means install a package into this document or into this set of files. And the one that we want to install is AMSmath and AMS simp. So there are two ways to do this. You can put them separately. So you can do use package AMS math and then use package AMS sim. So these will install both of these packages so that you can use any command from these packages here. Or you can put them all in one line. So instead of having both packages in separate lines, you can just have them in one line. Cool. And the comma will separate the package names. All right. And another one that you can add that I highly recommend is called Passkip. Then the Passkip package just removes the indentation at the start of a paragraph. So if I were to write a bunch of text, hi, this is some blind text that I don't care about, blah, 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 blah. And then I just copy and paste that. What you'll notice is that there's going to be a slight indentation here. So if I try to like scroll in, so there is like a slight indentation here. If I want to remove that, I can use the package Passkip. And Passkip will remove the indentation that you have. Cool. The style of a document, so you can break up the structure of your document into multiple parts. So if you want to break it up into specific sections, you can use the command section. Does the indentation matter for anything? Typically, no. So especially for assignments, they won't really care about the indentation of like paragraphs.
It's like fucking.
If you could please mute. All right. All right. So in terms of indentation, it doesn't really matter too much in terms of like your marks. It's more about like whether or not, like, especially when it comes to like when you want to write thesis, that can get really messy really quickly, especially when you have a lot of paragraphs and yeah, you might want to use Passkip there. But in terms of anything that you do in first or even second year assignments, typically they won't really care. Cool. So yeah, so Passkip is mainly just for formatting formatting, really nothing else. Yeah, so you can break the structure of a document into sections using /section. So here we can see that we have a section called introduction, and that will just define really just a header with just a number. So the number is basically auto assigned for us. So if we add another section and then we call it, I don't know, let's call it body, you'll see that it is automatically the numbers automatically generate for us. So we have introduction to body, we can always add another section and call it conclusion. And you can see that everything gets automatically numbered. If you don't want the numbering, say you only want the introduction and the conclusion to be numbered, then what we can do is we can suppress the numbering with an asterisk. So the asterisk just after section just suppresses the numbering. It would generate as usual, but we just have no number here. Cool. And we can do the same thing with subsection. So if we want to break up a section into multiple parts, we can always use /subsection. And that would basically do the same thing as what it does with section. So we can do subsection and then introduction 1. And if we compile it, then we have a new header called introduction 1, and it will be automatically numbered for us. If we don't want the numbering, once again, we just suppress it using the asterisk. So introduction 2, and we can see that it won't be numbered. Cool. We can also add headers and footers using a package called Fancy Header. So the Fancy Header package can be installed and you can just use it to create these fancy headers and footers. So to do this, we can go /use package. So we want to install Fancy Header. And then inside the preamble, so remember that we are in the preamble because we are outside of the begin document tag. We can use, I think it's fancy page style, I think. And then what we can do is we can do stuff like lfoot. I guess it's page style, I think it's, and then it's like fancy, I think. And then what we can do is we can do stuff like lfoot, which means left foot. We can write UNSW Mathematics Society. And so this is where we kind of look at our documentation for Fancy Header. So if we want to kind of look at Fancy Header, then we can just go to some of these websites, and then it gives us a lot of these documentation for how to use all of these. So yeah, it's Fancy HF. Yes, I haven't used this in a while. So Fancy HF, and then from there we can use our lfoot somewhere. Let me have a look. Page style fancy, yeah. lfoot, and we can use stuff like rfoot as well. UNSW Computer Science and Engineering Society. So they can do a lot of things with it, and it should theoretically pop up here. I will have a look and see why that's not the case, but oh yes, page style fancy. That's the thing I'm missing. Okay, I will look at that. Anyways, but you can do a lot of things with it. So that's just defining headers and footers. You can also add a table of contents. So to add a table of contents, all you need to do is just slap in the table of contents command, and you'll have your table of contents here. You can see that it kind of looks a bit ugly because everything kind of gets pushed down. What we can do is we can force a new page with the new page command. So if we want to have a new page, we can just do new page. And now it looks so much nicer. You can see that it's just contents here, and then it starts here. Ooh, and you can see that it does actually work. I think it just doesn't work for the first page. So yeah. Cool. I thought you couldn't define the fancy HF. Well, fancy HF and page style fancy are usually in the preamble because they are just commands that we kind of want to style the page with. But I think this is news to me as well, but I think it just doesn't work for the first page. So it's interesting. Yeah, cool. Now, so you can add a table of contents with / table of contents. You can add a new page using / new page. And finally, you can, how do you change the indentation of the header and footer? So I guess you can kind of brute force it if you really wanted to. There are specific commands to kind of mess around with the indentation a little bit. So if I were to like remove the R foot and I say, okay, I just want to indent this a little bit, I can use /quad. And /quad basically just adds a little bit of space. So what you can notice is that if I were to remove it, I'll make the thing a little bit bigger. I'll make this. So you'll be able to see that if I were to add a quad, then it should be slightly indented. So if I add 1 here as a reference, you can see that the quad makes it a little bit more spacey. And so you can mess around with the indentation like that. You can add multiple quads as well. So you can do quad. So it's quad. And you can just mess around with that however you want. Cool. The last thing we kind of want to go over, so the recorded link will be posted, I think, a couple of days after the workshop. So you'll get an announcement from the event saying that the recording will be up. The last thing we kind of want to go over with style is we can kind of add a list of items. So we can either number them or we can just add bullet points. So if you want to add bullet points, so say that you have like a list of ideas, then to do that, we do begin itemize. And remember that this is American, so it's itemized with a Z, not an S. And so from here, you can say, okay, this is dot point 1, and this is dot point 2. And if you compile it, you'll see that we have dot points here. If you want to change the, if you don't want any dot points, but you want to keep like this sort of, or this sort of structure, then you can suppress the dot point by adding these square brackets. And these square brackets basically tell you that, okay, there is no argument, so don't output the dot. So this is dot point 3. And if you compile it, then you can see that you have dot point 1, dot point 2 in dot points, but then dot point 3 will have no dot point there. And so you can mess around with that a little bit to your satisfaction. You can also nest itemizers. How do you change the style of dot point or change indentation for like nested? Change the style of a dot point. There's a couple of ways to do that. So what you can do is you can just manually change it here. So inside here, you can say, I don't know, let's do, well, let's do alpha, right? So that would change the structure of your dot point. So you can manually change it. There is another way to change the style of your dot point. So what you can do here is itemize actually does allow you to have an argument. And this argument is called label. And what you can do is there's a couple of labels that you can add. For example, if you want to have everything in terms of Roman numerals, what you can do is you can do /Roman, I think it's this. Oh, no, it's not. But I guess what you can do is you can mess around with this. And there's like a lot of different options that you can use. So I have an error here. Cool. And you can also nest. Can you label sections? What do you mean by label sections? So I can also nest all of these itemizers. So I can go itemize. This is dot point 3.1 using the label function. I don't think you can for sections. I will have a look at that, but I don't think you can. So as you can see, the rich text. So the rich text is more for people who don't want to do all of these source coding. So if you have a look at it, it's basically, it looks like this. So I personally just don't mess around with the source, the rich text, but it's basically for people who have trouble seeing, I think, a lot of the times. Yes, but I usually just stick with source. It's a lot easier as well. All right, so I will pick up the pace now. So yeah, so you can always use begin enumerate and begin itemize for unnumbered lists, and then enumerate for numbered lists as well. And you can always nest them. All right, and now we're getting into the heart of LaTeX. So there are different types of modes that you can use. So for equations and symbols, there are two types of modes. There is text mode and math mode. Text mode are whenever expressions appear as though they were plain text. So in order to do that, it's basically just this sort of thing. It just looks like text. On the other hand, you have math mode, where expressions will appear in slightly slanted text. And that is mainly to distinguish, say, text from equations. So for example, we'll go over what math mode is, and we'll go over like different types of math modes. But just know that this sort of equation or this sort of expression is different from, say, an alpha here. You can see that an alpha is slightly slanted. It's slightly slanted as opposed to text. How do you add a blank line? Well, what you can do is you can add something called H-line. And a H-line is basically just a horizontal line. You can also do I think it's H-fill. And H-fill will basically just fill up the entire row with just with blank. So it will look as though you inserted a blank line. So if you want to use, you can use hfill. But yeah, cool. So going back to math mode, there are two types of math mode you can use. The first one is called inline. And an inline expression is basically just a mathematical expression that is written alongside some sort of text. So for example, we have this mathematical symbol called pi, and we declare pi to be an integer. But notice that this pi is between text. This is what we call inline. And so in order to do inline, we can just use a single dollar sign, or we can use backslash parentheses. So for example, if I did this, so this is, and then I put dollar signs over this, then you'll notice that the dot point text is going to be in math mode. So you can see that it's slightly slanted. It's not like this sort of dot points. So this is how we can declare math mode from text mode. And you can see that it is in line because it's in line with other text. Cool. So for example, if I had, let me just move the chat. If I had this sort of document here, then ax plus by equals to c is going to be in line with this text. So we can try that out. Let's put it under this. So this equation, or this expression, let me have a look. This expression, ax plus by equals to c, has been known to ancient times, something like that, right? Where you have some sort of mathematical expression right next to text. And you can see that in the output, you have an expression here. Cool. So not too hard. Just remember single dollar signs for inline. For block equations, you'll see that instead of having it all in line, you basically just have a block specifically for that expression. So instead of having it just here next to your text, it's basically separated from the text into its own sort of line. And that is block equation. So instead of having these dollar signs, what we can do is we can just replace them with square brackets. So with these backslash and square brackets, and that will tell the compiler, oh, look, this is a block equation, and this is not a inline equation anymore. And you can see that it does separate itself from the text. So instead of having the text with the equation will be in its own line. And this is really useful if you want to declare, say, an equation, but it won't fit with the other text. So if you need it in its own line, that's how you can use the block equation. Cool. Some other basic symbols. If you want to express infinity, you just write /infty. So it's INFTY, and that will basically just return this sort of symbol. If you want to use a power, fairly straightforward. It's just a caret symbol, which is the little up arrow here. If you want to use a superscript and subscript, usually you can do that using the caret symbol. So if you want to use a superscript, just use a caret symbol. If you want to do it for text, you can use the text superscript command. And similarly for subscript, you can also do underscores, which would return this. So this sort of expression can be written as this in LaTeX. And finally, if you want to use text, you can just use text subscript, and this is what it'll look like. Cool. Now, fractions and sums. So fractions can be written using /frac. Frac will take in 2 arguments. So the first one is the numerator, and then the second one is going to be the denominator. So for example, if you wanted to write A divided by B, you can write that as frac AB. And similarly for sums, you can write that as using this form here. So remember that we want to use the underscore to denote the bottom part, so the bottom part here, and then the caret symbol for the top part. Cool. As a bit of an exercise, we're just going to use everything that we talked about. Can you write the code to output this expression here? So on the left-hand side, we want to write a sum, and on the right-hand side, we want to write a fraction. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first things first, do we want to write it using a block equation, or do we want to write it using inline equation? It's the first thing. And then the second thing is, let's just get writing. So to do this, let's just write it using a block equation. So the first thing we look at is we have a sum here. So we can go ahead and use the sum expression. So we do /sum underscore. So the underscore now will tell us we're looking at the bottom index, and then we want to group them using this these curly braces. So we want to write k equals to 0, and then we want to, is that any different from just doing, okay, so there is a bit of a debate between using the double dollar signs. Double dollar signs are actually outdated, and they don't recommend using double dollar signs, but in the grand scheme of things, nothing bad will happen to you. The reason why they haven't completely deprecated it was because a lot of the older packages still use the double dollar signs. And so if they get rid of it completely, then it will ruin some of the older packages that might be needed in the future. That's why they haven't fully gotten rid of it, but we highly recommend using these square bracket to denote the double dollar signs for block equations. Cool, oops. All right, so the top part is n. So we can just write n here. So right now, what we have here is just the sum part. So if we just rewrite it, or we recompile it, then we can see that we have this beautiful sum. The next part is we want to write r to the power of k. So in order to write r to the power of k, remember that it's just a power. So we do r to the power of k equals, and then on the right, we have a fraction. So I guess here, I'll just group this together. For a single character, you don't really need the curly brace grouping, but I highly recommend getting into the habit of doing it, because we'll go through an example where using the curly brace is not, if you omit it, then it's not as what you expected. And we'll go over that in a bit. But for now, we do /frac because we want to write a fraction. And finally, the top is r to the power of n plus 1 minus 1. So it's r to the power. So power is the caret symbol, n plus 1 minus 1 divided by r minus 1. And if we just recompile this, then I'm just going to zoom in. We see that we have this very nice equation here. Cool. The recording, so we'll release an announcement on the event page with the actual recording. I think maybe a few days after the actual workshop. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Cool. So we just finished this exercise. There are also a lot of things that we can do with equations and symbols. One of this is called an operator. LaTeX actually has a lot of built-in operators and expressions already, such as your trigonometric expressions, your inverse trig, the log, so /log and /ln. Yes, you will get access to the slides, hopefully maybe a few days after the workshop as well. We'll also post an announcement on that where you can actually find the slides as well. Cool. And you can also define your own operator. So in order to define your own operator, use the command operator name. So as an example, hopefully for people who've done 4-unit, you'll notice that if you tried /sys for cosine plus I sine, you'll notice that you'll get an error. Why do you get an error? Let's read it. Ooh, that's a bit big. All right, so the error is that the compiler is having trouble understanding a command because sys is actually not a standard, or it's not a standard operator. We only really use that in the HSC. So nowhere else really uses sys. So it's never really a standard operator. But we can make it standard in our document by using /operator name. An operator name will basically tell us, it's basically like as if it was text. So instead of having it all slanted, so if we did sys, and then we compare it to operator name, you'll notice that in operator name, it's as if it was text, and it's not slanted. So yeah, that's what we can do. So our exercise is that we can define a new operator called now you see me. Fairly straightforward. That is just /operator name, now you see me. And what you'll notice is that you will get basically it looking like text. Now you see me. Cool. For matrices, we can define matrices in LaTeX in a few ways. So if we want to define it using round brackets, we use P matrix. If we want to define it using square brackets, we can use B matrix. And if we want to write an augmented matrix, we can use the array environment. So as an example, I'll probably go over P matrix and then array, because B matrix works pretty much in the same way as P matrix. So I will go ahead and write something for P matrix. So to do this, we want to open our environment called P matrix. And obviously we want to close it in the end. So end P matrix. Now, what we can do is we can just go ahead and write our entire matrix. So 1, and then we can also separate it using the ampersand symbol. 2, 3, 4. And then in order to declare a new line, we use the double backslash command. And we can go 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. Oops. And 8. And what will happen here is that we get this really nice looking matrix. On the other hand, if you want to define a augmented matrix, there is no real way to do it. The best way I like to think about it is using arrays. So in array, it works pretty much the same way as a P matrix, except you have an additional command here, or you have an additional set of arguments here. So in order to declare an augmented matrix, we want to have the little pipe. And the little pipe here basically tells us to slap a line across. So as you can see, if we do 1 and 2 and 3, and 4 and 5 and 6, then what you'll notice is that you have like a block here with a little line. And what you can do in the end is you can do right with a little parentheses, and we'll go over what left and right does. But for now, we can see that we have declared a augmented matrix here. Cool. All right. Now, the last part of the first half, we'll go over how you might like to present your work. So now you have a bunch of different cool commands that you might like to use. You know how to write equations, you know how to write text, but now the biggest part with writing a document is to really structure and present your work. So the first thing we kind of want to talk about, the biggest thing we want to talk about is aligning your equations. So let's just imagine that you have like so many equations, and the only thing you know how to do with equations is using the little block equations. But if you go ahead and do that, say you have, I don't know, x squared plus 1 times x, let's do x plus 1 squared equals to 0. And then on the next line, you're like, okay, let's do x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals to 0. What you'll notice is that it looks all right. I mean, it looks fine, but it doesn't really look that tidy. The equal sign aren't really aligned with each other, and like everything just kind of looks a little bit out of place. So what we can do is we can actually align equations together. So in order to do this, we need to kind of start a new environment called align star. And remember that the star at the end means suppressing numbering. So if you don't have the star at the end, what you'll get is a lot of numbers. So if you do the same thing, x plus 1 squared equals 0, and then you do double backslash for a new line, and then you do x squared plus 2x plus 1. This will be pretty much the same as what you had before, except now you really have these numbering here. These will be aligned from the right side as well. So if you want to align it by the equal sign, then we have to declare it to be an and here. We need to have the and here to denote where we want to align our equations. So now we can see that, well, it is perfectly aligned by the equal sign. So if we do another equation here, let's just say x squared and equals to minus 2x minus 1. So we just move everything to one side. Then what we have in the end is that it's perfectly aligned with the equal sign. Whereas if we didn't have the and symbols, then it is aligned from the right. And you can see that it is aligned from the right. If you want to get rid of the numbering here, we just slap a little star on our environment. And from there, we have our equation here. Cool. Could you put the and on some other symbol? Yes, you can put it wherever you want. So if you want to align it in a very awkward way, so let's just say equal here, and then you can do and here, and then you can do and let's just say here. Then everything will be aligned by where you put the ampersand. So you can see that the equal, I'll make it a little bit bigger. You can see that the equal is aligned with the 2x, which is aligned with the minus 1 or with the 1. So you can put it wherever you want. The most natural place to put it is obviously wherever you have the equal sign. Cool, no worries. All right. Now, appropriately sized brackets and parentheses. So remember when we did the arrays, we kind of talked about the left and right. We didn't really talk about it in depth. So this is where it gets really important, because say that we didn't have the left and right, things will get a little bit ugly whenever we want to write an expression like this. Because for example, let's just say that we wanted to write that equation. Obviously we want to use block equations. So we know that we can write sign as /sign, but say that we wanted to write pi on 3. Well, we can write pi on 3 using the /frac and then /pi divided by 3, and that equals to /frac square root 3 divided by 2. You can see that this is not looking very nice. Our brackets aren't aligned properly. So a lot of the pi and the 3 kind of appears outside. Well, we can change that. We can appropriately size it by using the left and then using the right. And from there, we can rewrite this expression using very nice brackets. Cool. So fairly straightforward. Just get your left and rights, and then remember that for every left, you need to also have a right. Otherwise, it kind of doesn't really make any sense, especially if you want to use these brackets here. Cool. All right, so as a bit of an exercise, I kind of won't go through this a little bit, just because I think it's just an exercise for you. But basically, just remember block equations and appropriately sized brackets. And I think that's really all you really need to do this exercise. Yeah, and I also have the solution here, so you can read that in your own time. Cool. We can also put things into multiple columns. So if you want to have like sort of text on one side and then text on another side, we can do that using mini page. Mini page is basically just a page within a page. And we can declare how far or how wide we want the page. So 0.5 text width really just means half of the page length or half of the page width. And so this is what it will look like. So you can see that it kind of splits along the middle, and any text that is too long will wrap around the next row in your particular column. Cool. And I guess here is a good place to kind of take a little bit of a break. If you guys have any questions, I can answer them. We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 5:10. I might just start now. So that was the first half of the workshop. Basically, we just went over some basic tools that you might like to use in LaTeX. Now we're going into like the more stylistic parts of the workshop. So we're going to go over tables and also how to insert images and some other things. And then we'll end it off with some, I guess, introduction to writing pseudocode in LaTeX. So in order to write tables, we can just use the tabular environment. So the tabular environment is fairly straightforward to use. So it's just a tabular followed by a set of arguments. So we have C here followed by pipe C, and that will return this sort of output. So let's just kind of break it down step by step. So the pipe C means center align followed by a line separator. So you can see that this is aligned by the center, followed by a little pipe. So the pipe really stands for separate with a line, followed by a center line as well. And then you have column 1, and really just means separate each of the elements. So column 1 is its own sort of area. Column 2 is its own area here, followed by the little double backslash to denote a new line. And we can do the same, element 1 and element 2. And that would just return this sort of thing. But we don't have to just use C. There are actually many different arguments that you can take. So for example, you can left align with L, you can center align with C, you can right align with R, and you can align by the page width with P. And a table can also have a line separator, or it doesn't have to have a line separator. So as an exercise, let's write some code to make a table of 4 columns. The first 2 being left aligned, followed by a center aligned, and finally a right aligned. They should be separated by a line separator. So for example, this is something that we should kind of expect. So let's go ahead and write that. So we begin with the tabular environment. And we can see that parts of the code has already been written for us. So that's really, really good. So the first thing we want to do is to draw up a table of 4 columns. So here, and notice that they should all be separated by a line separator. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first 2 should be left aligned. So in order to do this, we do L, followed by a little pipe, followed by another L, followed by a pipe. Now this will create 4 columns. 2 of them are left aligned, followed by center aligned, and the last one should be right aligned. So that is basically what our argument looks like. And now let's write some of the code. So left aligned, center aligned, right aligned. So let's write that. Left aligned, center aligned, followed by right aligned. Right? And then let's do some test. So let's write this as test 1, followed by test 2, followed by test 3, finally test 4. And let's have a look and see what that looks like. We should expect to get the same output as before. And you can see that indeed we do get what was expected. So we get 4 columns, the first 2 being left aligned, followed by a center aligned, followed by a right aligned. Cool. So nothing too difficult. As long as you remember this sort of thing, then I think everything else will be relatively straightforward. Cool. And we can also add some horizontal lines. So in order to do this, we can use the command /hline. Hline just means horizontal line. So we're just going to use the previous exercise, and we want to add horizontal lines to the top and to the bottom, and also we want to close off the entire box. Okay, so to do this, we want to make use of the H line. And the best way to kind of play around with it is to just actually mess around with it. So let's go ahead and write H line here and see what that outputs. And you can see that it creates a horizontal line above our table, like we kind of expected it. So you can see that the horizontal line here closes off our entire box. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the bottom. So here, let's create a new line called Hline. And let's just see what it does. And you can see that it does close off the top and bottom. But there's a problem. We haven't closed off the left and the right. So we can kind of see that the the left and the right are kind of open. So in order to close the left and right parts, we want to pipe the first one and we want to pipe the second one. Remember that the pipe really just means a line separator, but you don't need to have any arguments to begin with. And that will close off our box, or that will close off our table. So now it just looks like a really nice table that we kind of expected. Cool. So I guess something that you kind of want to notice is that the placement of your H line does matter, because if you place your H line, say somewhere else, that will also create a very different output. So for example, if I put H line here instead, what that would do is that would actually create just this. So the placement of your H line should be dependent on where you want your actual, it should depend on where you want your actual horizontal line. So if you want your horizontal line at the top, you should put it just before your first row. Yeah, but that's about it. Cool. All right, so we've created a table, a really nice looking table, but what if we wanted to caption the table? Well, you can caption the table using a new environment called table. And this environment will also utilize the tabular environment that we used before. So this is just a bunch of code. I'll go through what each line means, and then we can kind of see how this will create this sort of output. So /begin table really just means open a new environment called table. And remember, you have to close off your environment with /end table. And then you have a couple of arguments that you might want to pass in. You don't need to, but this is just the position of your table. And we'll go through what position means in the next slide. But for now, just take it as it's just a positioning of the table in relation to the page that you're on. Then your next line is typically centering. And centering really just means place your table at the center of the page. So in terms of like where you want the table to kind of indent to, it would just make sure that the table is at the center of the line. Then you actually start your table like we talked about before. So begin tabular, and then these sort of options that you can use. C means center aligned, followed by a little line separator, followed by another center aligned. And then you create this sort of table here. Then you have a little caption. So the caption command basically will tell you, okay, this is the caption of my table. And finally, you have your label. So your label is useful if you want to refer back to the table. Say if you want to write references and you want to refer to a table, you can just use the /label. You can just use /label and then tab followed by whatever you want here. Cool. So I guess we'll do an example of that. Yeah. So again, with drawing up tables, you have like specific positions. So H means place the table here, not really here. It's more like relative to all of the other text that you have. So place the table here above this text and below some other text as well. T means to place the table at the top of the page. B means to place the table at the bottom of the page. P means to place the table on a separate page. The separate page is usually what we call an appendix. And then the H with the capital H is place the table precisely here. So regardless of what's actually happening on the page, place the table where I specifically want it. So as an example, let's kind of play around with that a little bit. So begin table, a lot of the code is done for us, which is very convenient. Say that we wanted to place the table at the top of the page, we just use T here. And then we say, I don't know, element, I don't know, table 2, and then text. And we can see that if we were to compile it, we can see that the table is at the top of the page. So we placed it underneath the tabular, but it will be placed at the top of the page, regardless of where it is. If you want to place it at the bottom, you use B, and that would just place it at the bottom of the page. So you can see that the table will pop up here. Yeah. So the table will pop up at the bottom of the page. If you want to use H, that really just means place it underneath this tabular environment. And you can see that it does place it underneath the tabular. And again, H, the capital H, is sort of the same thing, but it's more strict. So instead of having a more fluid, instead of being more fluid with the little h, it's a lot stricter. So it says precisely here, regardless of what's happening in the page. Cool. All right, so this is just an example. Say that you have some text. If you have a text, or if you have a table with positioning H, this is just where it is relative to the other text as well. We can also upload diagrams, and we can also upload pictures, and we can post them onto our document. Isn't it quicker to just draw tables on numbers or Word, take a screenshot and insert the table? You can. There is nothing wrong with just taking a screenshot of a table. But in saying that, it's a lot more tedious, especially when you want to work with large amounts of tables. Instead of having to manually go into Word or like whatever software you use to draw up a table, you can easily change that with just a few lines of code on LaTeX. And it also looks nicer. That's part of the reason why we use LaTeX over, say, Word, because it looks a lot less clunky than a lot of the what Word looks like as well. Cool. So in order to upload a diagram, we need to use the package GraphicX. This package is used to install pictures, or install a command to use pictures. And in order to do that, we just use the /include graphics. There are two types of include graphics we can do. We can use the width as, say, a particular measurement, or we can have the width relative to the page size. So let's find a picture, and I guess we'll do that. So images. Yes. Let's save this. Open image. And then image 1. And let's just post this here. So let's just upload an image called image 1. And what we can do is, the first thing we want to do is to install our package. So use package GraphicX. And then the second thing we want to do is to just upload it. So in order to do that, we use include graphics, and the width equals to whatever we want. So let's just say 50 centimeters, image 1.jpg. And let's have a look. So if we want to have a look, oh, this is quite big. So this is 50 centimeters wide. So it's quite big. We can make it a little bit smaller. But hopefully you can see that we can actually just upload pictures and we can just post pictures here. So yeah, so we have a bunch of tables and then we have a picture. Looks very out of place, but yes, we love that. We love to see that. On the other hand, can you center the picture? You can. We'll get to that in a bit. On the other hand, what we can do is we can go, okay, I don't want to have specifically a measurement. I want to have it relative to the actual page width, because sometimes we don't want to mess with that. So we use text width, and text width will center, or not center, but it will basically ensure that the picture is in full, and well, now it looks a lot nicer. So typically, as a rule of thumb, you should always use text width instead of a particular measurement, because a particular measurement will usually distort the picture because it has to like stretch the picture, whereas text width will either place the picture in full or it will place the picture as far as it can to reach the entire page width. Now, someone asked whether we can center a picture. We can. And we can do that using figure, or we can do that using what we call a center environment. But I guess we'll talk about a figure first. So just like with tables, we can also include a caption and we can also center it. So pretty much it's the same structure as a table environment. So you have begin figure, you have centering, followed by the actual command, include graphics, followed by a caption, and then a label to finish things off. With the table, you have tab as your label. Here you have fig as your label. So let's go ahead and do that. So begin figure, a lot of the code is already done for us, which is really nice. And let's go ahead and do the same thing. Text width, image1.jpg. And you can see that, first of all, it is centered. So that's really, really nice. Yep, so you can see that it is centered. So, and it has a picture. No, it has a caption with figure 1. So that's how you can upload pictures. That's how you can write little captions. You can also do centering. If you don't want to use figure, you can use begin center instead. Just remember that center is actually the American version, because guess what? It's an American software. So we have to use the American spelling. And instead we can do this. All right, and what that will do is that will also center the picture. We can also change the alignment, so we can do flush right. So if we want to do flush right, what that will do is that will center, or that will align our picture so that it's aligned on the right. And you can also do the same thing with flush left. So I guess it's hard to see it because I did text width, but if I did it a little bit smaller, then you'll see that it is actually centered on, or it is placed on the right. And you can do the same thing with flush left. Include graphics width equals to 0.6, text width, and you can do image1.jpg. And you can see that it does align on the left. So that's how you can mess around with the alignment. So you can have it centered using the center environment. You can also do flush right and flush left to align your pictures based on where you want it. Cool. And I guess like that's really only the beginning of what you can do. Is there a way to put text beside the image? You can. So this is getting a little bit more complicated. So what you can do is you can kind of cheat the system a little bit. Going back to what I said with mini page, here somewhere, going back to mini page, that will split your page into parts, right? So what you can do is you can go begin mini page. And then here you can have 0.5 / text width, and that will split your document into halves. And on the left side, what you can do is you can go, okay, let's put in include graphics. Let's do a new page first, and then we'll have a look and see what we can do. Width equals to text width, image 1, the JPG. So if we do this, then you can see that our picture will be aligned on the left part of the page. And then what you can do is you can do begin mini page again. Here you can do 0.5 text width, followed by some text. So yeah, I'll install a package called blind text. And what blind text will do is just generate a bunch of random text. And oops. But yeah, basically, and you can also mess around with this so that it aligns on the right as well. So basically just mess around with it a little bit. And yeah, you can do a lot of things with it. So there's a lot of documentation online as well. So that's sort of what I wanted to get into as well. So basically this workshop is not meant to be extensive. So it's not meant to cover the entire scope of what LaTeX can do. This is just only the beginning. You can see that I haven't really included a lot of things such as how to mess around with integrals, but integrals are basically the same as the sum. You can also do single, double, and triple integrals really nicely. I haven't really talked about PGF plots and ticks, but those are things that you can kind of research on your own. The workshop today is really only just a taster for what you can do with the power of LaTeX. You can write resumes and academic papers with it. And there are lots of resources online, such as Math Stack Exchange, the classic Stack Overflow of math and LaTeX. Overleaf guides, so heaps of guides online. You can also look at some previous LaTeX workshops, Google, and also a website I highly recommend is something called Detechify. Detechify has saved me so many times because say that I don't know what one of the symbols is. Say I don't know what omega, so I just did this. And what it does is that it gives me a bunch of suggestions for what I can do. So there are heaps and heaps of resources online for you to kind of just look at. And yeah, the world is your oyster with LaTeX. The last so this is just a fun little challenge if you really want to kind of test your skills. As a hint, use V dots and D dots for vertical and diagonal dots. Now, in the last half hour, I'm just going to dedicate that to people who need to write pseudocode for their comp assignments. So the best way to write code, or if you wanted to ever write code on LaTeX, is to use the listing package. Now, the listing package comes with many different sort of options and guides, but if you just want to go for a simple one, usually verbatim is the easiest one to use. So let's install, okay, so let's write it here. Let's do a new page and let's write verbatim. So verbatim is pretty much just an environment where you can kind of write your own code. So it doesn't require you to install anything. It doesn't require you to set anything up. So it's very, very simple. The issue is that it doesn't have any syntax highlighting. So like the code that I have in my workshop slides, where I have this sort of thing, where I have like begin as a color, that's not really allowed in verbatim. Rather, it's just a bunch of black text. But I guess if you want to go for something that's a lot easier to set up, then verbatim is the easiest one to use. So let's write a bunch of code. Let's write in C code / include standard input output .h / include standard library.h, and let's just say, I don't know, maybe a very basic example. And if we want to indent our code, then we just use the tab. We can just tab it like we do with code, and then we can go, I don't know, return 0, something like that. And that should compile code, hopefully. Yeah, and that's what it'll look like. So it's very straightforward. And you can see that there's nothing colored. So if you have a long list of code, verbatim is your go-to if you want something simple. If you want to have color though, then another package that you might like to install is called listing. And listing is basically just source code listing. We then use a LST set package to define some attributes. And we finally use the command lst listing to kind of start writing our code. So if we go ahead and do that, then the first thing we want to do is to use the package listings followed by lst set, I believe. And then we can do something like language equals to Java. And hopefully nothing happens. Yeah, so no errors so far. That means we've installed everything correctly. Then what we can do is we can go ahead and write our code. So in order to do this, we use begin lst listing, I think. And then we can go ahead and write our code again. So I guess here, Java code, yes. Well, I guess we can do C. I haven't done Java in a while, so let's go ahead and do C. So / include standard input output.h # include standard library.h. And again, we can just copy and paste this code. Hopefully it runs. Yep, it runs. And then we get, look, and then we get like some more syntax in here. So you can notice the difference between these two. This looks a lot more closer to code. And we can also have color here. So what we can do is we can go, I believe it's something like keywords equals to blue / color. And then we can do blue. And that should, it doesn't, okay. But in the actual documentation, you can kind of see like what you can do here. So you can do something like keywords equals to blue, and you can do like some other things as well. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to writing code on LaTeX. The simplest way is to use verbatim. But if you want to have a lot more finesse in your code, then you can use LST listing. Or if you want to have a one-liner, then what you can do is you can just use text TT. And text TT basically will make it look like source code. So hi, this is a text TT code. And it will pop up with this. So you can kind of have a look and see that indeed you do have this sort of syntax here. Cool. And I think that's about it in terms of the LaTeX workshop. We finished a little bit early. If you guys have any questions, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll be here for another 20 minutes if you guys have any questions.